Welcome to Beneath the Bible, where we're helping you dig deeper and uncover the world beneath the sacred book. Today, we're wrapping up our series on divination in the Bible and the ancient Near East. Last week, we looked at the ephod and teraphim, objects that were seemingly related to priestly divination practices. Tied up with these items are these mysterious objects, or object called the Urim and Thummim. Now, it's not clear what these are other than objects involved in oracular divination. When things aren't clear, there's lots of opportunities for scholars to speculate. And boy, is there plenty of speculation about what the Urim and Thummim may have been. Let's dig in and see if we can make sense of these theories as we examine the Urim and Thummim in the Bible. The Urim and Thummim aren't mentioned very much in the Bible, with just a handful of references. We see in Exodus 28 the Urim and Thummim are placed in the breastplate that hangs from the ephod. In a variant of this text, it says, "the Urim and Thummim that you make." Now, this is a curious addition. All the other priestly garments are referenced with instructions of how to manufacture them, what kind of metal or fabric to use, and how to put it all together. Now, that's not the case with the Urim and Thummim. In fact, it's only in that textual variant that we're told that it should be manufactured. So it's not clear what these are from this passage, or even if it was in fact manufactured. Some traditions maintain the Urim and Thummim were gifts from God as a means of communication with Him. What's clear is that these were part of the priestly accoutrement, kept in the breastplate of the high priest and used to inquire of the Lord. Priestly source literature seems to say the Urim and Thummim should only be used inside a Yahwistic shrine, while other sources are less strict on that point. Some scholars maintain that whenever there is a reference to someone inquiring of the Lord, the Urim and Thummim should be understood as being used if no other method is referenced. Now, probably the most notable passage about the Urim and Thummim is 1 Samuel 14. Here we see Saul using them to determine who has committed a taboo after God doesn't respond to him initially. Saul comes to the conclusion that someone has sinned, but he doesn't know who. Now, the reader knows that his son Jonathan has unknowingly violated his father's rash vow, but in order for Saul to learn this, he inquires of the Lord. He calls a priest who was explicitly said to be wearing an ephod earlier in the chapter. Saul then says to determine who is guilty, they will use the Urim and Thummim. If the army is at fault, Saul asks God to respond with the Urim, and if Saul or Jonathan is at fault, then answer with Thummim. Saul and Jonathan were taken by lot, and then the fault was determined between Saul and Jonathan. Now, from this passage, it seems the Urim and Thummim were associated or used comparably with lots. It seems that the Urim and Thummim would be cast in the same manner as lots, and Urim or Thummim would be drawn as the response. Now, this is a fascinating passage because we see the Urim and Thummim in practice, but we still don't get a great picture of what they actually are. We're led to understand that David also consulted the Urim and Thummim, but at some point their use fell out of favor. They weren't in use in the post-exilic period. Prophecy seems to have supplanted them. So, everywhere they are mentioned in the Bible, we're left without a detailed description of the Urim and Thummim. It's assumed that the audience knows what they are. But we're not that audience. And what are they? And what else can we know about them?
I really wish I knew. It seems you get 10 scholars in a room and get 11 different ideas. The only real consensus is that they were used in oracular divination. But what are they and how were they used? There are a few different takes on this. In Hebrew, Urim and Thummim are spelled like this. Urim starts with the letter Aleph and Thummim with Tav. We can also note these are the first and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet. They appear to be plural in form, but that might not indicate that there are multiple Urims and Thummims. One option is that the Urim and Thummim are what are called pluralis intensivis, or plurals of excellence. In Hebrew, words can be put in the plural not because there are more than two of them, but the plural form can be used to express grandeur or holiness or excess greatness. The word Elohim, a plural word, can be used to refer to the singular God. It can refer to one God or many, but usually is used to refer to one God in the Hebrew Bible. If Urim and Thummim are plural, then they derive from the word for light and to be complete. Additionally, these words may be combined as a hendiadys. This is when two words are put together in one phrase to communicate a single concept. Common hendiadys in English is when you say you are safe and sound. In Revelation, Jesus is described as the Alpha and Omega, as those are the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet. There may be something similar here with the Urim and Thummim referring to a sense of completeness or wholeness by starting with Aleph and Tav. Urim and Thummim might mean something like perfect light, and as a hendiadys may be used to describe a single object. Suggestions of what this object is are usually some kind of precious stone, perhaps one with markings on it. And it suggested the Urim and Thummim were meant to glow or emit light, again, assuming the words Urim and Thummim derive from light and to be complete. Another option interpreters have suggested is that Urim and Thummim may refer to a set of objects, again drawing on the Aleph and Tav idea. And this may refer to a set of objects like from A to Z. There may have been an object or a facet of a stone corresponding to every letter of the alphabet, and the Urim and Thummim was a set of potentially a couple dozen objects or a pair of D12 dice or something. Though personally I think this is a little less likely. Others think Urim and Thummim only appear to be plural and are actually an archaic form of a word that is in fact singular in form and perhaps derives from a foreign or at least non-Israelite practice. If they are not plural and are in fact singular, then they're referring to one object called Urim and another called Thummim. Finally, one scholar has suggested that Urim and Thummim were not lots per se, but were a check on other kinds of divination that ultimately fell into favor with the rise of the classical prophets. We've already talked in this series about how the prophets denigrated divination through means such as dreams in favor of what they saw as a more direct communication through prophecy. The same attitude may have also prevailed over divinatory practices. So there's an overview of some possibilities for what the Urim and Thummim may have been, mostly based on linguistic evidence because we don't have descriptions of the objects or the objects themselves. That's the most we can glean from the Bible itself, but is there evidence from outside the Bible that can help us understand the Urim and Thummim? Yes, but also no. I'll start by saying when there are things in the Bible that are confusing, scholars will often look to other cultures to see if there is some parallel that might shed light on the biblical text. The Urim and Thummim are certainly confusing, so scholars have looked far and wide for parallels in other cultures. So far, there isn't anything like a direct parallel, though there are possible examples of similar practices. One commonly cited parallel is the Tablet of Destinies, referenced in the Enuma Elish and the Myth of Anzu. This was a tablet that was worn around the neck of the chief god as a kind of marker of their supremacy. It was said to be fastened to their chest, though how it was affixed isn't entirely clear. The connection to the Urim and Thummim is that they were worn on the chest of the high priest, who was an intermediary between God and his people, as a direct connection to God and of discerning his will. When you dig into this parallel, at first it seems that it has a bit going for it, but then it kind of breaks down. The Tablet of Destinies was primarily a mark of power and authority. It was where the decrees of the gods made for the future were recorded. They don't seem to be related to being a form of mediation between the gods and humans the way the Urim and Thummim were primarily used. There are texts from Mesopotamia that seem to have a closer connection though. Cuneiform tablet given the catchy name of LKA 137 has some interesting parallels. This text dates to the Neo-Assyrian period, but is likely a copy of a much earlier text. This text refers to casting lots using two dice, both of which have names. One die was named Aban Ereshi, or the desirable die, and the second die was called Aban La Ereshi, or the undesirable die. The text has a description in it, a kind of subtitle that says, Incantation for Oracular Decisions with Alabaster and Hematite. Alabaster is a white or translucent stone, and hematite is typically black or a dark red color, so there's a clear distinction between these two materials. The text describes the lots being drawn out of an article of clothing, and the lot casting being done before the gods, and inquiries of the gods being made in a yes or no binary. A lot of that is common with all Hurowitz, but there are some things about this description that are pretty close to the Urim and Thummim. Other frequently cited parallels are the Hittite kin oracles. Scholars have debated what these texts are, and now generally agree it was some kind of lot casting oracular process. The available texts describe a very convoluted and complicated process, and it's very interesting to read, but it's not clear to me how closely it's connected with the Urim and Thummim, other than they are probably both oracular lots.
So, if we tie all this together, the Urim and Thummim with the ephod and teraphim, and come up with our best guess of what they are and how they were used, here's what we think is most likely. We think the Urim and Thummim were probably oracular lots. And it's most likely that there were two objects. Now, my own inclination is that they were probably colored precious stones or stones with a marking or an inscription on them. They were stored in the ephod, either in a pocket or a container worn by the priest, or in a special receptacle. Like all other lot casting, inquiring by Urim and Thummim was done before God. Exodus 28 seems to point to this. The association with the ephod and teraphim further drives this home. If the teraphim are representations of the gods, and the Urim and Thummim were stored in the ephod, then you have a ready representative of the deity before which to conduct the lot oracle. The Urim and Thummim apparently were a special means of divination reserved for elite and public use, meaning that this was for the high priest and for kings. Your average Joe Hebrew wasn't using the Urim and Thummim. Now, they would cast lots for sure, but not with the Urim and Thummim. This was a highly special, if not specialized, direct connection with Yahweh. The use of the Urim and Thummim fell out of practice sometime shortly after the time of David, and it seems to have been supplanted by classical prophecy. Instead of the high priest being the mediator of divine communication, the prophets became the primary mediators of God's communication with God's people. The Orthodox view would be that God chose to change his way of communicating, or there were simply cultural and theological developments that led to the rise of classical prophecy. These changes may have been precipitated by the division of the Kingdom of Israel and by later exilic and post-exilic realities. And that's a good point on which to conclude this series. Throughout this divination series, we've wanted to emphasize that we don't endorse these practices or believe that they're still valid for people of faith today. Rather, we've wanted to give insight into how the Israelites understood and used divination, especially these specialized objects, the ephod, teraphim, and Urim and Thummim. Divinatory practices in the Bible may seem unusual or even like occult practice to modern readers, but they were commonly understood to be legitimate means of communication from God in Israel's early history through the period of the United Monarchy. But these practices fell out of favor and disappeared leading up to the exile, and they were never revived after it. They were a distant memory by the New Testament period, replaced by the beginnings of Judaism as a text-centric religion rather than a temple-centric one, and with this transition being completed following the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Within Judaism, communication from God was understood to take place through the increasingly standardized biblical text rather than through divinatory practice or even through special revelation like prophecy. Christianity developed a similar understanding as the New Testament canon formed in the early centuries after the time of Jesus. Rather than revelation through divinatory practices, both Judaism and Christianity focused on the discernment of God's will through what God has already revealed in the Scriptures, an emphasis that continues to this day. Thanks for joining us for this Beneath the Bible video. If you liked what you saw, be sure to give this video a like and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. You can also follow us on social media, on Twitter and Facebook at Beneath the Bible. If you learned something new today, take a minute to share this video with your friends. And until next time, keep digging.